Japan is a land that has many unexplained and frightening tales in its history. From castles with bloody pasts, to modern hauntings, to tunnels with mysterious specters, apartments inhabited by poltergeists, and department stores filled with tormented spirits. Many of these tales are found within the pages of the books written by Phillip Jackson. My name is Kevin O'Shea, and welcome to the Supernatural Japan podcast. In each episode of this podcast, I bring you the supernatural, strange, and the darker side of history of Japan you might not hear about anywhere else. In this episode, I'll be chatting with Phillip Jackson. He's the author of Paranormal Kansai, and now Paranormal Japan and Tengu and Other Stories. And this evening, we talk all about spooky Japan. Hello, everyone. We are here with another episode of the Supernatural Japan podcast, and in this one, a little bit different as the normal ones because I have a guest, and I'm very excited to have a guest, a returning guest from one of the first episodes of the podcast way back in the day. Although there are not that many episodes, of course, you know there was quite a gap in between numbers 9 and 10. I would like to welcome back to the show Phillip Jackson. Thank you for coming back.
Hi, Kevin. Good to be back. Thanks for having me again.
Yeah, and it was actually more than a year ago, probably a year and a half ago, that we first talked, and you were telling us all about the Paranormal Kansai book that you had written, and I've asked you to come back this evening because you've done a lot more since then, and I'm looking forward to digging into the new books you've written and talking about those, and of course it is Spooky Month. So it is October, and I'm always very excited to just talk about anything spooky. And I know that you've got lots of stories to share. So yeah. So for those of you out there who are listening, for the listeners, I should say, who are maybe new to the podcast, the Supernatural Japan podcast, I was wondering if you just introduce yourself and let everyone know, who you are and where you're based.
Yeah, sure. Keeping a long story short, I'm originally from the UK, North England. Spent some time in London, which is where I met my Japanese wife, which is where the Japan connection came. Moved to Japan in 2003. Spent about 3.5 years here, back to the UK. And then we came back to settle in 2012, and here in Kyoto, and I haven't been back to the UK since then. So 11 years since being back in the UK.
Very nice, very nice. I mean, Kyoto's a pretty amazing place. I was just watching some videos from Kyoto just before we hopped on this Zoom call. I was watching John Dobb of Only in Japan fame on YouTube, and I was watching one of his live streams that he'd done earlier today from Kyoto. You were on an episode of another podcast I host, the Just Asia podcast, just this past summer, and we got to meet in person for the first time, which was absolutely wonderful. And I remember we sat down in Otsubo Koen, and we talked all about, well, many things, and including these topics. And we both watched me being slowly drained of blood by clouds of mosquitoes that seemed to prefer me as opposed to you. So I guess supernatural things were happening right there. There were mini vampires. So we did. Now, mind you, that's another podcast. It's another series. And everyone out there listening, I'll leave a link below to that episode as well. But we in that episode we discussed, and I want to chat about it now, how you became interested and fascinated with the paranormal, with the supernatural. Where did that come about?
Basically since childhood. As I mentioned in that podcast, I grew up in a small village which had quite a lot of old houses dotted around, and my brother and I, we decided that all old houses must be haunted.
Of course.
So, yeah, of course, natural assumption. So there was farmhouses, farm buildings, barns, and we'd go around the village and looking for ghosts as children. Yeah. And I remember actually in my primary school, what you would call elementary school, with classmates, we did 1 or 2 experiments, checking temperatures in an empty classroom and things like that. I had all the Ghost Hunter's Handbook, and I think it was the Osborne Book of Ghosts.
Okay.
So yeah, the one that everybody has who's into the genre. So yeah, from a very early age, and then obviously, as you grow up and different interests and work and life, I got sidetracked away from that, and didn't really get back into it properly until maybe only just a few years ago. My brother carried on having an interest, and he used to run a group in our hometown which covered everything from ghosts and spectres through to UFO sightings and things like that. Mm-hmm. He used to get a lot of calls from people local and take in sightings. But one of the set of books that we talked about on the Just Asia podcast was the Hidden Paths Walking Historical Kyoto, the walking guide books that I do.
Yes.
And it was basically through doing those books that I would come across all these paranormal locations, what's called Shinrei spots, where ghosts have been sighted. And I started putting some of those into the walking guide books, the Hidden Paths books. And then when COVID came, I couldn't get out to do the walks. So I wanted to put some content out. And so I put together a compilation, Paranormal Kansai. And as we discussed before, Kansai is that area in sort of central to west Japan, Mie, Kyoto, Hyogo, Osaka, Wakayama, Nara, and Shiga. Mm-hmm. And I had a chapter for each one, and all these stories, ghost stories, folklore, legends, UFO sightings, cryptid creature sightings. And that sort of got me back into it, really. And then from that, I was asked to go on the Unexplained radio show for now and again for just some 5-minute slots whenever they came across a story from Japan that was in a newspaper. Mm-hmm. And then this year put out the Paranormal Japan book, which extended from Kansai to the whole of the country, really. And it's doing those two books that's got me back into it.
That's fantastic. I mean, I know for me, I guess maybe in a similar way, I grew up kind of with that fascination and borrowing books from the library, the public library in my small town. And I grew up in this little village in Eastern Canada that had a lot of history. I mean, we had a French colonial fortress from the 18th century that was in our hometown that is still, it's a kind of a living museum, or there's a reconstruction there. And there were 2 massive battles fought in my hometown. There was 2 sieges by the British against the French, that they fought over, in the New World back in the 1700s. And there was a lot of conflict and a lot of things happened in my, that area where I grew up. So I was always fascinated, but I fell away from it until 2020 when, during the pandemic time, I was working in China, and my family were based in China as an international school teacher. That's what I do. And in 2020, when COVID kicked off at the very beginning of 2020, we kind of fled to Japan, as my wife is from Osaka. And, the borders closed in China, borders closed in Japan, and there we were for almost a year. And that's when I discovered a whole new genre of podcasts. And it was kind of the true crime / paranormal stuff. And, I started listening to one called the Nighttime Podcast from Canada. A guy named Jordan Bonaparte hosts that. And I mean, he had true crime, but there was a mixture of true crime. And he's also fascinated with the supernatural and UFOs. And he'd have episodes like that and have UFO experts on and things. And the Paranormal Podcast with Jim Harold, and then Somewhere in the Skies with UFOs. I started listening to all these things, and I'm just like, this is so awesome. And there's this, and I really got into it. And then you got me hooked in the summer when we met on the Uncanny Podcast.
The Uncanny, yeah.
Wow, next level. That was so amazing.
That kind of that series of podcasts came about maybe either during the COVID times or just before. Because what they put out first, it's done by a guy called Danny Robbins in the UK. And first of all, he did a series of episodes just focusing on what was called the Battersea Poltergeist.
Yeah, which I haven't got. I'm kind of in the wrong order. I haven't got to that one yet. I can't wait to. That's the first one. I'm going reverse order.
And it was kind of part dramatized, part investigation, and discussion. And then from there, he started the Uncanny Podcast.
He had the Witch House after that, right? There was the Witch House is the one I
yes, yeah,
which was where they had some pretty big names who were doing the kind of dramatizations too. There was like that's and then Uncanny, which you can I guess tell folks about.
Yeah, well, I think they're on season 3. It's on season 3 now.
Just started.
At the moment, it's just turned into a TV show as well, which just started last week. But unfortunately, in Japan, I can't get to see that. But basically, each episode they have a different case, and it's part dramatized, great sound effects. It's probably one of the best paranormal podcasts out there. Really.
I think so. Yeah, there's really nothing I can quite compare because I mean, they interview the real people who had the experiences. They sometimes have dramatizations, and then he's got like a kind of like experts. He'll have a skeptic and a believer. So he'll have these experts like a paranormal investigator and then a paranormal skeptic to talk about different things, what could be going on here, and they really jump back and forth. And they seem to have quite a big following too online because they do these kind of they'll sometimes have these episodes in where they're actually just like addressing all the comments and theories that the fans have, and then they do like live meetups, and they've actually had some big live events too. It seems.
Yeah, I think there was one on Friday evening actually.
Oh well, okay.
Yeah, so they've had quite a few of those, and also they have Twitter listen-ins as well. Or we should call it X now, shouldn't we? Where
we'll forever call it Twitter. It's okay.
Where the show is broadcasted, and at the same time, they're following it on Twitter and discussing as it goes along. Cool. But it's really good. It's probably one of the best ones out there. I think that one.
Cool. Well, maybe as we grow, maybe next summer, when I'm in Japan, it could be a Supernatural Japan meetup. We can get to meet again and have some folks come for sure. Now it won't be that big, but it could happen. I'm actually right now in the process of reading Paranormal Japan. I'm pretty much done. I've read quite a bit of it in the last couple of days. That's before we hit the record button, folks. I just was explaining to Philip that I'm just recovering from a bout of food poisoning, so I've been basically held up all day. Which, in some ways, we'll look at the positive. I got a lot of reading done. But the Paranormal Japan. Tell me about the writing of that book, and also Tengu. Tell me about that.
Well, the 2 books came out in August this year, and they were both sort of content pieces of work that had been hanging around for a while. So I did Paranormal Kansai in 2021, and I wasn't sure if I was going to do another one or not. And I kind of got halfway through it and took some of the feedback from Paranormal Kansai, and then decided to finish that this year. And Tengu is a collection of 3 stories. It's called Tengu and Other Stories. The 3 stories are Tengu. For anybody who's not aware, Tengu is a sort of a mischievous supernatural being, sometimes seen as sort of a harbinger of war and evil coming. There's different kinds. There's the Karasu Tengu, which is sort of half bird, half man. The Yamabushi Tengu, which is sort of like a mountain hermit. And the Tengu are famous for, they're supposed to be very good swordsmen. And they were famous for training the exiled samurai Minamoto no Yoshitsune from in the Japanese folklore. So there's a story of the Tengu and Hibagon. Hibagon is the Japanese Bigfoot, which is it was a creature that was reported, a lot of sightings in the 70s on and around Mount Hiba in Hiroshima. So that's where it got the name Hibagon. And the third story is titled Mokade, which is the giant centipede. Anybody who knows anything about Japan and its bugs, the Mokade is the one to look out for. Very painful bite. But again, in this story, the Mokade is not the sort of 5 to 10 centimeter long creature. This is a huge creature in the story because it's fiction. But these are all creatures that are connected to Japanese folk tales. And again, the Mokade, this is going back to the 10th century, where there's a story of a Japanese aristocrat, Fujiwara no Hidesato. He was claimed to have defeated a 200-foot, 12-horned Mokade. Okay. So that was a book of 3 short stories that are connected to sort of paranormal and folklore. And strangely, I was expecting the Paranormal Japan to do better because it's sort of one of those genres that has its fans. Whereas fiction, when you're an unknown writer, doesn't really get picked up that much. But actually, the short stories has done better than the Paranormal Japan book, which I was quite surprised. Pleased with, because it's nice to have your own fiction picked up by people and get some good feedback. But it was quite surprising.
Yeah, it's lovely when that happens. That's the good surprises, But I mean, like you said, it's before we hit record, we talk about this genre and, talking about the supernatural, talk about the paranormal. I think the interest is growing and growing when you look at, for example, just like YouTube content creators. And I don't mean like Japan-centric ones, but I mean, the whole kind of genre of paranormal investigations and stuff is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And it's, of course, to be honest, I've never actually watched an episode, but I hear so many people talking about ghost hunters. But one thing I do appreciate and I do love, because I think they're hilarious, but there's a series called Ghost Files on YouTube, and it's by 2 guys, Ryan and Shane, who they worked for BuzzFeed, and they used to work. There was a series called BuzzFeed Unsolved and BuzzFeed Mysteries, and they were the 2 hosts of that. And they had some hilarious takes on like looking for Mothman and the Goat Man and Bigfoot and all this stuff. And then they basically, I think once they left their BuzzFeed contracts, they went and started their own company and their own studio, and now they're doing kind of ghost hunting shows, which are really entertaining because they're just 2 funny guys, a lot of humor. But what I've seen is now just like there are so many YouTube channels that have popped up with ghost hunters, and some of them actually have become really successful. Some of them are very painful to watch. I've checked out a few, and some are kind of like Haikyo people, like urban exploration people who've kind of were doing urban exploring of it, like, exploring abandoned buildings, and have now kind of changed genres. And it does make sense where you can see that connection because they spend all their time. Yeah, go ahead.
It's interesting you say that, because one thing I've noticed as well is some of the hiking and camping YouTubers have started to lean towards not just hiking and camping, but let's go hike and camp overnight in a haunted location.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Because they treble their views.
Yeah.
And some of them are, they're putting up videos where the thumbnail, has a picture of them looking scared, and it says, what was that? And, and it'll be a video of them, and they hear some noises in the night, and they say, what was that? And they're trying to put a paranormal slant onto it. As you say, I think some of the YouTubers who are not necessarily in the paranormal genre are either moving in that direction, or they, take a step there every now and again.
Yeah, because they know it's going to generate some views, right? It's going to up things. So, it's spooky month. I always love October. I've always been a big fan of the season, and I think in Japan, it's a great time. I just did an episode talking about, the kind of, history, air quotes I'm using, of Halloween in Japan. But honestly, August is the true spooky month for Japan. But you have a lot of interesting stories, and I know, like, when we last talked, when you were on the Just Asia podcast, you shared a lot of great stories. I'm wondering, I don't know if I'm hoping I'm not putting you on the spot now, but do you have any stories you'd like to share for the listeners? Some kind of spooky Japan stories for spooky month.
There's a couple that I sort of picked out from the book Paranormal Japan, a couple of my favorites. And they're both ghost stories.
Oh.
And One of them's called the Sendagaya Tunnel, and the other is the Gifu Poltergeist.
Which I'd never heard of these.
Yeah.
I mean, I read your tunnels chapter, and there's like a few, I know like in Paranormal Consci, you definitely looked at some tunnels, but the Gifu Poltergeist was fascinating. I'd never heard of that before until I read your book.
I mean, it's quite interesting as well because there was a movie that came out just a year ago called Building N, and the reviews for it basically said an urban legend horror film based on the true story of the ghost apartment incident that occurred in Gifu Prefecture's Tomika town in 2000. So I was kind of hoping that there might be some stories after the movie came out, some updates. But as yet, I haven't seen anything new. I mean, it's not a particularly old story. It started in 1999. The actual happenings, and from the descriptions of the people who lived in the apartment building, it only really occurred for sort of like 2 or 3 years, but it was pretty intense for those 2 or 3 years. And then it sort of died down. And as I say, the movie came out last year, Building N.
Okay.
I haven't seen the movie, but I can quite imagine that it's got a lot more fabrication from the than the actual story. But I should take a look. But yeah, I mean, I can go through that story.
Yeah, please do.
Poltergeist. I mean, basically, from this is from Paranormal Japan, as I've written it in here. At the beginning of 1999, in Tomika City, Gifu Prefecture, the local authorities built a new 4-story apartment block. The rent was offered cheap, and so the 24 apartments in the block were quickly taken. But in April of the same year, strange things began to happen. At first, these occurrences were small, but gradually grew more disturbing. Doors to various apartments would open of their own accord. People heard noises coming from their rooftops, strange sounds, ghostly apparitions, things moving, electrical tools working without a power supply. And just to add in there, I do actually have a list, a printout from I'm holding up to the screen, so although listeners won't be able to see it, but you will. Okay. This is from an investigation.
Okay.
And one of the investigators made a list of some of the things that was reported to him. And each apartment, so there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 apartments that made sightings out of the 24. But yeah, just to continue with the story, soon these occurrences spread throughout the entire building, and a few families left the apartments temporarily. Room 404 had it the worst. Glass doors of the cupboards would rattle loudly and suddenly burst open, sending plates and cups flying everywhere. The president of the neighborhood association, who himself lived in room 101, reported that, "I heard the sound of the curtains opening, so I went to have a look. Even though nobody had touched them, they were opening bit by bit." So I have this image there of him standing and watching the curtains slowly opening.
Yeah.
Nobody is there. People reported an unknown woman on the 4th floor stairs with black hair and grey clothes. Others saw white shadows moving on their verandas. Things went so far that the priest was called in to take a look at the building and what was going on. According to the priest, the ghost of a woman who was killed 30 years earlier was haunting the building. After investigating, it was discovered a woman had been murdered in that area 30 years before. But even after the priest cleansed the building of her presence, the strange happenings continued. One day, a housewife who lived on the 3rd floor and another housewife who lived on the 4th floor went to the neighborhood association president's apartment. The housewife at the 3rd floor apartment said, "After 9 p.m. at night, I can hear the sound of a child jumping around on the floor above me." When she asked the housewife from the floor above about it, she said her child was already asleep at that time, so there was no way they could be making a noise. Further, residents on the 3rd floor soon reported they could hear the sound of a child running around and what sounded like a table being dragged across the floor. When they asked the people living on the 4th floor about it, many revealed they were too scared to sleep there and were spending their nights elsewhere. Their apartments where the noises were supposed to be coming from were empty. So a good piece of evidence there. They were hearing noises above, but actually the apartments were empty.
Hmm.
Ehara Hiroyuki, a spiritual counselor and medium who often appears on TV, heard about the building and went to visit. According to him, many soldiers and commanders from the 16th century Sengoku era were still around the area as spirits, and they were causing the poltergeist activity. Spirit mediums from all over the country came to visit, and they expanded on the story with their own theories. One claimed the area was once used for executions, and another claimed that the flying dishes were from a spirit that was killed by shurikens, small throwing blades. A newspaper reported the incidents, and journalists came to the apartments. Some TV production staff members brought mediums to the apartments and let them try to do clairvoyance or exorcise the ghosts. And others asked researchers to make scientific investigations. The apartments became a kind of tourist attraction, and many paranormal tourists came to see them. Additionally, mediums or religious persons came from all over Japan. They visited residents and in some cases did rituals without permission of residents or walked around late at night. For example, one cult group came suddenly in 3 cars in the middle of the night and began doing their own rituals there. I mean, some people might say, well, if people were turning up uninvited, unexpected, maybe some of the sounds that were heard could actually have been those paranormal tourists. But
yeah. And a lot of it would have been a lot of creepy behavior if you just have strange people showing up in the middle of the night to investigate.
Yeah.
You got people roaming around the place, maybe trying to look in windows, putting their ears to the doors, I
mean, I many years ago when I spent some time living in London, one of the streets that I lived on for a couple of years, just further down the road was the house where the serial killer Dennis Nielsen had lived and killed some of his victims and pushed their body parts down the pipes. So there used to be murder tourists, crime tourists.
I heard about that case.
Tourists used to turn down there.
I heard about that case on the Morbid Podcast. Yeah, that was a funky one.
And the way he got caught was that his drains got blocked, and he called a plumber.
Yeah,
and then the plumber called the police.
Yeah,
so he handed himself. Was a fool to himself, really.
Yeah.
So in 2001, a spirit medium visited the building in Gifu and performed a purification ritual. The female medium, who not only made the rounds and performed an exorcism at each apartment and then announced that the problem had been taken care of, but also she refused to charge any fees and even left behind some money as an offering. Her diagnosis of the situation was that the disturbances were caused by 4 spirits, including a swordsmith who had been cut down by a sword he himself had forged, and a Portuguese missionary martyred during Hideyoshi Toyotomi's persecution of the Christians in the early 1600s. For the time being, things calmed, but by the summer of the next year, the disturbances apparently started up again, though to what extent it's difficult to clarify. The apartment building still exists today, and people do still live there. There are rumors that apparently paranormal or simply unexplained activities do occur every now and then, but it would seem that for the most part, things have calmed. On December 14th, 2003, 4 years after the first reports, an investigator visited the apartment buildings with a woman who claimed to be sensitive to the spirit world and paranormality. However, they were unable to approach the building closer than less than 20 meters and were able to stay there for only 20 minutes because the woman suddenly felt ill and suffered backaches. The story of the Gifu Poltergeist has been out of the news for many years. And then we go on to explain about the movie.
Yeah.
And as I say, I was expecting some more stories to come out after the movie, but as yet, nothing has come up on that.
Yeah, you would think the movie would rekindle some interest or spark new interest in people, and I don't know. It's it's interesting. Maybe we'll start to see more of these air quotes paranormal investigators from YouTube from around the world coming. I mean, a lot do already come to investigate things. So,
the next story, the tunnel, has some similarities with one that you covered on the podcast already, the Sendagaya department store fire.
Oh, okay.
With a connection of recorded sounds. So this is called the Sendagaya Tunnel. This is in Tokyo. About 15 minutes walk from Sendagaya Station in Tokyo is Senjuin Temple, and attached to the temple is a large cemetery. It's a busy area just off of the Sendagaya intersection in the heart of the city. Noticeably close by is the location of the 1964 Olympic Stadium, now a new stadium after the original was demolished in 2015. And it's that construction that plays a major part in the story behind this location and its paranormal connection. As part of the constructions in Tokyo for the 1964 Olympics, many new roads and buildings were needed, and some older sites were simply in the way. The cemetery at Senjuin was one such site that was an obstacle. Because time was short, a tunnel was built under the cemetery instead of relocating it. Kind of sounds a bit like the movie Poltergeist, isn't it?
Yeah, right.
They build the housing, the residential area on top of the old Indian gravesite.
Yeah, exactly.
The tunnel is quite short, 61 meters, and has 2 lanes on either side, and was opened in March 1964. And of course, the strange happenings that had been reported with the tunnel draws one to wonder, was it really a good idea to build it right under a burial ground? People have reported being chased by a blood-stained woman with long black hair. Drivers have claimed to have heard a noise as if something heavy landing on the roof of their vehicles as they drive through the tunnel. Some witnesses alarmingly saying that handprints appeared on their car windows. Others have simply said that they feel a frightening atmosphere from the tunnel. And if that's not enough, workers at a building close by, the Victor Music Studios, have also made some startling claims that are believed connected to the tunnel and cemetery. They report that unexplained sounds like babies crying have turned up on recordings made late at night. And there's the connection to the Senichimai department store, where the music in the elevators had sounds of women crying in the background. But when they took the recordings back to the recording studio to check them, there was nothing there. It was only in the lifts of the department store.
So for you folks listening, that would be episode 1 of this podcast. And it's ironically enough, when I had recorded that podcast, I had never been to that area. I'd been to that area, but I didn't know the story. But since then, I've actually specifically gone to the current location of Bic Camera and putted around a Bic Camera, and my son bought some Lego there actually, and I bought I bought I believe I bought this at that I bought a Nanoblocks Himeji Castle at that Bic Camera. Which I have yet to construct. But it's a fascinating tale. And you hear that kind of so often with these stories, these places that are haunted. I just did the episode about the Sunshine 60 building, that they're on ground that has a dark history, often executions or burials. Even the first place in China that I went and investigated, I went to the Bank of China Tower in Shenzhen, China, which was supposed to be the most haunted building in Shenzhen. And that was built on the grounds of an old prison, execution grounds. And actually during the Cultural Revolution, a lot of poor souls lost their lives in that spot, as Chairman Mao basically, wiped out millions of people. So, wow. So, these books now, of course, I want to let everyone know, where are they available? Where can people find these?
So all the books, the original books, Hidden Past, Watorito, and then there's the short stories titled Tengu and Other Stories, and Paranormal Kansai, Paranormal Japan. They're all available on all the regions of Amazon.
Okay, awesome.
So just go on to any Amazon in your area, just put those titles in, and they should all come up.
Fantastic.
One thing to mention, on Amazon.com, they do have a tendency to keep putting the books on quite big discounts.
Okay.
So if you use Amazon.com, you should get a really good deal there.
Oh, okay. Cool. Good advice there, folks. And I'll put those links below in the show notes. You're an hour ahead of me. I don't want to keep you too late. I know you got to work tomorrow. So I want to thank you, Philip, for coming on yet another episode of the Supernatural Japan podcast. The reboot. We're back. And thank you so much for sharing these stories. And you guys out there listening, definitely go and buy these books. Where else can people find you online? Let us know all the places where they can see the things you're doing.
There's the Hidden Paths website, which is www.hiddenpathskyoto.com. Mm-hmm. And that's got all links to the books and walking routes if anybody wants a guided walking tour of Kyoto. People always say that Kyoto is overcrowded, over-tourism. The areas where I take people, if they want a guided tour around, they will not see crowds, but they will see scenery and history and paranormal spots, but no crowds.
Nice.
And then on Twitter, at P Jackson Music.
Nice.
X, Twitter.
Nice, yeah. So folks, if you are interested in a different twist to a walking tour in Kyoto, Japan, maybe something a little paranormal, this is your guy right here. You go contact him and he can hook you up, which is very cool. Very great. I'm hoping I'll be back in Japan next July for a little while. Hopefully if all that works out, and then we can meet again in person, and maybe I can go on one of these hikes with you. That would be absolutely fantastic. So Phillip, thank you so much for coming on another episode of the podcast. I'm hoping to get you back on a lot more as we progress through this journey of spookiness in Japan.
My pleasure. Always happy to come on, Kevin.
A big thanks to Phillip for coming on the podcast. You can find all of his books over on Amazon.com. You can also go to hiddenpathskyoto.com to find all the links to his books and what he's up to. Follow Phillip on X or Twitter at pjacksonmusic. He's doing a lot of cool things, folks. Go check it out. Also check out his travel series books, Hidden Paths Kyoto. Definitely worth picking up, worth downloading, worth buying the paper copies. So again, go to hiddenpathskyoto.com to check those out. Now, since I'm releasing this episode just a few days before Halloween, I hope that you all have an amazing celebration wherever you are. Happy Halloween, everyone. Now, I want to thank each and every one of you so much for listening to another episode of the Supernatural Japan podcast. Come and join our growing community over on our new Facebook page. The link is in the description below. Come on over and like or follow us there. And there will be lots of photos, links, and additional information about this episode over on the Facebook page. And you can, of course, email me with any comments, ideas, or stories at supernaturaljapan@gmail.com. Follow us over on Instagram at supernaturaljapan for loads of photos from Japan and all of these episodes. I like to also share a lot of my nighttime photography from Japan over on Supernatural Japan, guys. So go over there, check it out. I also share a lot of my night photography over on the Facebook page. One thing I personally love to do in the years I lived in Japan, and each time I get to go back to Japan, is to take a lot of photos as I explore each and every night down the back alleys of Osaka, Japan, and different parts of Kansai, wherever I'm staying. Okay, you can of course also follow me over on Twitter at MadForMaple. Now, we appreciate you guys helping the podcast grow, and you can do so by sharing this podcast on your social media and with like-minded friends. If you are a member of any big Japan-related Facebook groups, please share our episode there. It definitely helps it grow. Now, hope you all keep things spooky, especially since we're almost at Halloween. And we'll be back really soon with another episode of the Supernatural Japan podcast.